Good evening. Namaskara Ellarigu. And a very warm welcome to Esther Duflo and Cheyenne Olivier to our beautiful city of Bangalore. Yeah, you know it's beautiful, right? Yeah. Have you experienced the weather today? It was raining mostly. I don't think you were outside much. I think you just got in. When did you get?
We just got in, but we had time to see the sheets of water.
Was it cooler than Calcutta?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So that's our biggest brand.
Almost cold.
Almost cold, yeah, that's right, we are. So very, very happy. I never thought I'd be sitting like 2 feet away from a Nobel Prize winner. Yeah, so this is amazing. And Cheyenne, very happy to have you as well. So this is the book that has just been released by Juggernaut, which is a translation in English of Esther and Cheyenne's books. There are 10 different books, actually, in French. And they were hardcover books that were brought out separately. But in India, we brought them out in English as one fat picture book. So this is really lovely. And what I love about it, when I first got this, was it said for kids. And being a children's author, of course, that makes me very happy that it's a children's book. Poor Economics for Kids. And I love the line at the back, which says, a Nobel Prize winner explains her work. I mean, what can be more seductive than that? You know, first of all, poor economics for kids, and then a Nobel Prize winner explains her work. And I think it's more seductive for adults than for children, because we say like, okay, it's a complicated subject, I don't know anything about it. But if it's a book for kids, then maybe I'll be able to read it and understand it. And if a Nobel Prize winner explains her work, I mean, what else could you want? So thank you so much for bringing this book to us, to life, and for our kids. I want to talk about, you have covered so many different subjects about what is poverty and why do people remain in poverty. But I wanted to ask you about the title. I know it's based on the 2011 book that you wrote called Poor Economics. But it's a little confusing, the title, because we don't know if you're saying poor economics or economics about poverty. Do you want to tell us why you chose that title?
So thank you very much. First, thank you everyone for being here. BIC for welcoming us, and Juggernaut and Pratham Books for giving us a chance to be here by putting our books out. It's a great privilege to have them out, not only in English, but also in 5 Indian languages, and therefore with a chance, if they are good enough, to reach a lot of children in the entire country. Poor economics is a pun as intended. It's both economics about poor people and it also not very good economics. And the reason why we chose that title is that a lot of economics that is about the poor is just not very good. It has become much better since we wrote Poor Economics, not because of us, but in the intervening period. But really when I started in this field, a lot of policies and theorizing about the poor were based on very, very little understanding of what their life and constraint actually might be, and with much more ideology than empathy. And that just created what we call is poor economics, full of prejudices and then kind of lessons based on such prejudices. So this is really what we wanted to address with poor economics.
Okay. So you've got 10 books and you've covered every single possible, I think. But let's see. So the first story is about education, why that doesn't work for the poor people or what needs to be done to make it more exciting, attractive, why people drop out of school and things like that. Then you have health. Then you have migration from villages to cities. Then you have politics. Then you have a little help, like a little nudge that is required sometimes, a lack of knowledge, because I think you say that many times in your other books and interviews, that sometimes it's just a lack of information that keeps the poor poor. They don't know what schemes there are that they can make use of. Then you have conservation, environmental conservation. Then you have, what do we call that? The water. That's the water one, the don't touch the vegetable garden, conservation of water and growing the crops that are right for your region. And then you have entrepreneurship, which is actually one of my favorite stories. That was a lovely one. And then you have something about how the poor find it so hard to recover from disaster, why they find it so much harder to recover than the rest of us. And the last one is a lovely, hopeful one called The Dreams of Nilu, which is, the dreams that they all have. So as you said, the poor have been beset by stereotypes. And I find that there's a common thing between how we talk to children and how we talk to the poor. We believe we know what is good for them better than they do themselves, and we often don't listen to what they're saying about their own condition, and we don't validate it. We feel we know better. So in what ways, can you give us a few examples of the stuff that we believe is right for the poor, but you have found through your work is not quite right for them?
So I think what is striking about the discourse on poverty, and often as a result the policies that follow, is not so much that the ideas are entirely wrong, but that poor people are reduced to caricature. So one of these caricature, and since you like the Imeuni and Songhai story about entrepreneurship, is actually starts from a positive place, is the idea that the poor are all natural-born entrepreneurs, and all they want is to start business, and all we need to do is to give them money, and with that money they'll be able to start and grow their business and become Bill Gates. In due course. And this is ignoring the fact that the poor, very much like the rest of us, some of them are risk-loving and like to try out their luck, and many of them just would like to have a quiet life. And in fact, they're forced by poverty to have a very risky life because there is no job for them, so they have to make a job. But it is not necessarily what they are good at or what they desire to do. And so that's one example of that. And in the book, Imeuni is prompted to become an entrepreneur because someone comes to offer her a loan. And then this is when she discovered, she has absolutely no idea what she wants to do as an entrepreneur. And when she finally after several attempts, gets a good idea, it's actually not a good idea that she should or could do on her own. This is an idea that should be done as part of a larger organization which, by the way, was inspired by Pratham and one of their program, Prodigy, which made digital tablets available to kids. So she wants to become, at the end, after several failures, she wants to put educational games on tablets, but she's not very successful at it. And then she realizes that she can do it much better if she does it as part of an organization that gives her the training and the content and supervision and so on and so forth. So she actually gets a job. So that was an example of one of the stereotypes.
Yeah, so there are very many stereotypes like that broken in the book. And Cheyenne, let me come to you. Did you have any exposure to development economics before you started working with Vijita and Esther at their home?
Thank you very much for having us tonight. I think I lived with Esther and Abhijit for a few years before starting this project, so I actually had a lot of exposure to the work they were doing. We went several times with Esther on the field, and I met some of their co-workers. I had poor economics, and since we were talking about stereotypes, what I would say is that even having read poor economics several times, because as soon as I knew that I needed to illustrate it, I had to read it even more carefully. Despite having read it, I still had stereotype and even visual and narrative stereotypes. So
in one
of the images you can see there, it's the third image of the first book, and we see Nilu going to school. And in my head, I had this image of a poor kid going to school and having to climb a mountain or having to walk miles and carry a wheelchair, or something very dramatic. And it's tempting as an illustrator and as an author to go for the dramatic, to go for the heroic. But as soon as I showed this to Esther, and the first line I wrote, because my job was to also write the first text out of the story, and the first thing that Esther said, which is, "Oh no, but this is not true," and this is actually said in poor economics. Almost every child now has a school within a mile.
Oh.
So this
Really?
is where I realized that I needed to read poor economics much more carefully. But even having read it, the stereotype, the prejudice was still there. So in that sense, it was also the whole process of doing the books and thinking about the images, the text, the stories was very much also a learning process.
That's an amazing insight, actually, because yes, with picture books particularly, we have to be very, very careful. And I know that in Pratham, they discuss it endlessly about how to represent in pictures so that they won't succumb to stereotypes, you know, because there are so many kinds of poor people also, even within, you know, 3 streets of each other, that we can't, there is no one way to represent them. And that's why I find the fact that both of you work together and use this, created this sort of alternative universe, fantasy universe, psychedelic, where there are lots of colors and you can't really pinpoint it or situate it in any particular geography, and the names are also like that. So, but is poverty really that universe? I mean, the causes of, and don't cultures and geographies and specific practices matter?
I'll answer this question, and then Cheyenne can say a little bit what this implies to as an illustrator, because that was kind of a challenge that I gave her to her from the beginning. So yes, of course, there are elements of poverty that are culture specific, element of lives of people in poverty that are culture specific. But this is not what. But this is not what we wanted to represent. This is maybe the way that poverty is typically represented. It's grounded in a place. We wanted to show instead the universalities of some problems. And I'm not saying, of course, this is 10 kids' books, so there is no way in which this represents every single issue that happens to every single poor person. But we wanted to highlight those topics because they have been also very fundamental to our own work. That there are problems that are pretty similar that are kind of the results and also the cause of poverty that are pretty similar from place to place, and therefore also admits solutions that can be similar to place. And it's very essential to the work of JPA that you can learn lessons from places and apply them in other places, as long as you remain context sensitive. And this is also what I wanted to do in this book.
Yeah, Cheyenne.
So this presents the idea is very nice, but then how to actually implement it is another thing, because for an illustrator, when you have to represent a world, usually you're a bit lazy and you go look for references, visual references that you can copy and you can put in the book. And so if Esther had told me this book, the series will be placed in Bangalore, then I would have gone for pictures of Bangalore, how people dress, what do they eat, how do they act together. But there, it could have happened in Kenya, where Esther worked, in India, where she works, also in Europe somehow, but in many other places. So I really had to create an entire mixed up world. So one way in which we did that was through the visuals. So you'll see, as you could see in the pictures, the characters are very stylized. So this was one way also to avoid being too realistic in the features. The colors, the skin colors are also realistic, and
the trees and everything.
Exactly, everything is that level of stylization also says that the purpose of the book, and there are many other books on poverty that are very located, that tells you about poverty in one specific place, but that this book will be set somewhere else, somehow in a world of economics or in a world of ideas, and the ideas are what you have to take out of those books.
Sure. I also read that you use, and it shows in the books, that you use certain geometrical figures over and over again to sort of build the illustrations. And whether they are trees or people or stones, you use the same kind of basic building block and then go on to build them. Was there anything philosophical while you were thinking about it, that we are all made of the same stuff and external differences are only superficial and things like that?
There is definitely something like this, a sense of unity, because since the world has no reference, it had to have a coherence of its own.
Yeah.
But also the fact that since it was about economic ideas, I wanted to get inspiration from the visual that you see in economics. And for example, in poor economics, at the very beginning, you see the S and L curves that represent a poverty trap. And this for me was a very striking visual that then runs through the book. You'll see the book is all set on like a continuous curve that goes up and down.
Yes, yes.
And that evokes also visually and poetically the ups and downs of the characters. And economics is also about the allocation and the reorganization of resources in the same space. So in
Correct.
that sense, I had a limited set of visual graphic resources that I played.
Oh, that's a
with.
lovely explanation, actually. It really comes out very well in the book. Very nice. And Esther, I love what you've done at the end of every story. You've given a little context. The story is the story, but what does it mean? What are the questions that children should ask themselves? And if you don't mind, may I read something? Yeah, okay. So this is from a story called Neso and Naji. Naji? Yeah. Neso and Naji, Not Afraid of the Big City. And it's a story of urban migration. And, again, we succumb to these stereotypes that everybody must be wanting to come to the big city. Everybody, we have these everybody kind of statements in our heads where we say people are just migrating from the village to the cities like lemmings. Everybody comes here. But according to what Esther has found through her work, that is not actually true. And many people would love to stay where they are, even if the circumstances were not the most favorable. And so she talks about why are there so many people staying in their villages during the hungry season when they barely have enough food to feed their families? Why don't they go away for a few months and find a job? They could work on a construction site or in a factory in a city or town or even in another village where the hungry season is not at the same time. So she talks about one of her friends, her colleagues, Mushfiq, who grew up in Bangladesh, now a professor of economics at Yale, and the kind of randomized control trial he did. This was a randomized control trial? Yeah. So, and it's so commonsensical and so simple to understand that it's actually lovely to read. And it feels like something any of us might do it this way. Mushfiq made a list. One, maybe these are the options. Maybe there are why are people not going? So maybe there are no jobs in the city for someone from the village. Maybe there are jobs, but they don't pay enough. Maybe there are jobs that pay a lot, but people don't know enough about them. Maybe they can't afford the bus ticket. Sometimes it's just as simple as that. They don't get health treatment and everything because they can't afford the bus ticket to take people to the city where the treatment is. Maybe people know that there are jobs, but they also know that some people fail to find one, and they're worried it could be them. Maybe living in the city is just too scary. They would be far away from their loved ones, and city living is quite gross if you don't have a home. So they just prefer to be at home, even if this means that they will stay poor. Which do you think he found was the actual answer of these options? Who says, how many of you think because maybe there are no jobs in the city for someone from the village? No. Maybe there are jobs, but they don't pay enough? Yeah, some of you think so. Maybe there are jobs that pay a lot, but people don't know about them? Perhaps. Maybe they cannot afford the bus ticket? Yes. Maybe people know that there are jobs, but they also know that some people fail to find one and they're worried it could be them? Maybe living in the city is just too scary. So I think we heard the most yeses for the final two options, which is what Mushfiq found once he did his randomized control trial. So things like this, and she explains how he began to cross off option by option and came to this final thing. Not that it's anything conclusive, but it still just helps you go there. Esther, this seems such a commonsensical approach that I can't believe that before you guys started talking about RCTs, like how they do for drugs, that people didn't used to do it in economics. What did it used to be like before?
I think in some sense there was this kind of dark ages where we believed maybe in our theory a little too much. So there was less sense that you needed to expose the theory to the data, because if you believe in your theory so much and the world doesn't fit to it, it's easier to change the world if you've first contorted it in order to try to extract something from it. So I think if you very strongly believe in the theory gives you enough of a guide that it can help you interpret pretty much any thing that you see in the world, to the extent you even bother to see it. So really where our forefathers, one thing they did in development economics that was quite different than in other fields is that they actually went out and started to collect data.
How old is development economics as a science?
Per se, it's quite old. Schultz got the Nobel Prize in particular with the idea of poor but rational, which is it's not because you're poor that then you're an idiot. So he had this very strong view, which is only partially true, but at least was a contrast to the perception that people had before him that, oh, the poor people are just poor because they are not
Smart.
doing the right
They're
thing.
not doing the right thing.
And he came very strongly across that and saying, no, they are doing whatever they can with the limited resources they have. And he slightly overplayed his hand. It was in the sense that everybody is partly irrational, poor and rich. But his idea that I think is very sense that you should not consider someone as being inferior to you just because they happen to be poor is something that maybe is has made him the patron saint of development economics, whatever we think about that specific view. In any case, that's the world of not too many people were doing development economics at all. In development organizations were very led by big fashion. So when we came and started to kind of get the idea of starting with Michael Kramer and then Abhijit that one could do experiments. This was not new in the sense that it existed. Randomized control trials, of course, are the bread and butter of medicine. They are very important in agriculture, including in India, where and in other places where they were the ground on which the Green Revolution happened. And there were even some social experiments in social science in the 70s in the US, which were then a little bit forgotten. But then if you start thinking about poverty not as a one-dimensional thing, but as many, many problems that you can address by one, and then it starts to become possible to think about each of these problems in the most rigorous way. And then that kind of naturally makes you to want to think like someone who is trying to test a drug, because you have no reason to have a very strong view of what will work, what will not work, and why. And so kind of naturally leads you to the idea of applying randomized control trials. Then, so conceptually, it was not a leap. Then people were also thinking that, well, it would be nice, but it's really hard. People will refuse, it's expensive, it's logistically hard, and so on. And that is maybe where we did some of the work, is by through organizations like JPAL, and through the movement that has built around JPAL with friends like Seva Mandir in India, Pratham in India, and others all around the world as well. I'm quoting in India the kind of early movers in this space, is to show that actually it takes a village. In fact, we call it a movement. It takes many people to be involved, but it's quite doable. And then with an infrastructure like the one we have in JPAL today, where just in South Asia we have over 600 or 700 people in the field to collect data, managers, policy people who are conveying questions to the researchers and results from researchers to policymakers and so on. Anybody can plug into this structure, and it's more work than downloading a data set and running regressions, but it's still feasible. And that, I think, has contributed to make it, not only we realize it's kind of, when I started doing economics, I would write, the ideal experiment to look at the effect of education on wages would be to run a randomized control trial, but since we cannot do it, blah, blah, blah. And after a while, I was like, no. If it's the ideal way to do it, then we do that. Otherwise, there is no point. And I think now it's become much more of a reality.
Yeah, so I think we should give them a big round of applause for proving that it could be done. I think that was the barrier that was preventing people from actually going out and doing them, and now we have actual data. And also you talk about asking specific questions rather than a very large kind of macro question. So have you found some surprising answers to specific questions that goes counterintuitive? I mean, you mentioned some of them in the vaccine and the health one. That was in India, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so could you share that?
Yeah, so many. I mean, it's a nice, I think a useful feature for me to be in this particular line of business is that on most programs, I actually don't have a very strong sense of what I'm expected to find. So I'm really surprised because I'm very open And one of my favorite sentences, how would I know? But still sometimes you get surprised by what you're getting. One of these surprise is displayed in the second book called Afya. Afya means health in Swahili. So it's not completely
not a made up
not
word.
completely made up. A lot of names are completely made up, but this one is actually not. At some point in the book, we illustrate the fact that people are encouraged to come and go to vaccination center by, in the case of this book, by receiving a bat net.
Mosquito net.
Mosquito net.
Yeah.
Mosquito net. The first, which is how it's done in many countries in Africa now. The first experiment that we did on this was with Seva Mandir in Rajasthan. We were giving parents a kilo of lentils to come to vaccinate their children. And we expected that it would have an impact, but it really had a huge impact. In fact, so big that it was cheaper to have a camp where you immunize children and give lentils than to have a camp and not give lentils. Of course, it was more expensive because you gave the lentils, but per immunized child, it was much cheaper because the nurse happened to immunize so many more people that her wage and all the fixed cost of running the camp were spread on a much larger number of people. So the fact that you find such a large effect of such a small incentive, that was surprising. And the fact that it reversed the usual way of computing cost and benefits, that is so counterintuitive that I'm still failing to explain it to most people. Because usually when I say, well, you can give incentive to parents, someone is always saying, well, but it's not sustainable. Like, in what way is it not sustainable? If it costs you less money to immunize kids and you're willing to give the vaccine for free, then it is sustainable. Yeah. But so this is really counterintuitive to us that we could save money by spending money.
Yeah. Cheyenne, in your experiences, like, have you been to the camps that, or whatever work that the field work that Esther and Abhijit do in India? And what has been your big finding or big surprise about poor people? Or you told us about how a poor person dresses or has to walk miles to school. Like that, on field work, have you found something that was very surprising?
So I went, the first time I went was with Esther in Udaipur, in a village. And I drew that scene. It was a project. I was doing travel sketchbook at the time, and I drew that scene. They were replanting indigenous trees on the bare hills near the village. And you could actually see the hill. It was very graphical. So the hill was partly half replanted and half bare desert-like. And so it was very, I guess that was very striking. They could tell you we are doing this, and the hope is that we can grow those trees again. But there it was, and it was so compelling visually that there was no question.
But they were going to plant the rest of the hill as well. Just that
no, I think this was like, I think the other half of the hill was private, and so they couldn't, so it was like a natural divider.
Yeah. Esther, you talk about coming to India for the first time and being a bit shaken up by what you saw and almost disappointed. So please tell us about your first trip to Calcutta as an undergrad student and what you came hoping to find.
As a graduate student, actually, my first year of PhD. But so I grew up being very in a kind of liberal, upper middle class family in France, not meeting very many poor people in my everyday life, but being in a very in a household where it was important that we were exposed to the notion that there are poor people in the world. And in fact, my mom was a pediatrician who was active in an NGO of pediatricians working with children victims of war around the world. So she would travel and then come back and show us pictures. And as part of this effort, there was books about Mother Teresa. And I read in a comic book about Mother Teresa that in Calcutta, it is so crowded that people have just 1 square meter to sleep. And I also remember in the metro, huge posters of people suffering from leprosy. So I really had, and even after 1 year of taking development economics, this notion that people in Calcutta lived squished together like sardines and are all suffering from leprosy, which probably they pass to each other by be living together like sardines. So I'm exaggerating, but slightly.
Yeah.
And I first landed in Calcutta, and I was driving through the city, and it was orderly and beautiful. To this day, I love Calcutta, and people were kind of going about their own business, very leisurely. If people know Calcutta, you know what I mean. Any kind of early evening, having this kind of, you had this scene of people outside, eating a snack, chatting away, and I was like, wow. This is not what I expected to see, and this is really a very fundamental experience about this idea of we have so many, in this instance, perfectly well-intentioned parents trying to expose me to the reality of the world, planted so many stereotypes that we have to constantly put them in questions.
Yeah. What was your first experience? Do you want to tell us?
No, just to add to this, it is very easy to represent poverty from the external point of view, at least for an illustrator. You were mentioning caricatures before. It could be very easy to draw a poor person and to convey the idea that this is a poor person. It's much harder to try to tell it from the point of view of a poor person who will see the bad points of its life, but could not live with just seeing this. So in that sense, this is why also the illustrations are cheerful, they are colorful, and part of it, and thanks to Pratham, maybe many more kids, including kids who are poor themselves, will be able to read the books. And I don't think they could go to page 3 if they were just seeing a book that only tells their own life in an extremely dire and miserabilist way. And in that sense, that was very much, you can see some pages where the characters are directly looking at the reader and they are telling their own opinions. We really try to give them, each character, a voice to also really get that internal feeling perspective.
Yeah, so another thing I wanted to ask you was, for an adult, it's very compelling. We know all these things. We live very close to it in India, particularly our maids, people who help us at home and in office and everything. We know that they live this kind of life, that they're just a hair's breadth away from complete financial disaster. You know, one bad illness could wipe them out, and we know this, and we support them in whatever ways we can. But I haven't had the opportunity. My children are all grown. I couldn't give it to children. I got this book only very recently, so I didn't have an opportunity to give it to a child and see how they reacted to it. So did you mean this for children of a particular privileged class, to explain to them that the problems of poverty, so that they don't get sucked in by the kind of stereotypes people around them are already or are always sharing with them?
Hopefully we meant it for every child. Both the rich children like me, you know, I was thinking of myself, and both they influenced this book. After all, this book about Mother Teresa, however wrong-headed it was, that's the reason I'm here. Because reading this book and other books, other such books, is what gave me a sense that there are poor people in the world, they have very different lives, and you know, it's really sheer luck that you're not born there, and you have to do something with that luck. Like, very early on, I had that view. So these books were extremely influential, however problematic they were. So for me, it's important that rich kids in India, but also in France,
this is definitely, I can see that
get a chance to be exposed to the lives of others, see the similarities, see the differences, and relate to these children as they're, you know, people who are not very different from them, except that they live in different contexts. But we will also, and this is what Cheyenne was saying, it's very important to us that poor kids can also read them. And in fact, maybe you can tell about the experience of migrant children.
So first from that, I took a lot of many ideas, and thanks to Esther, because she gave me a lot of scope for adding some personal things to the stories. I grew up with not so much money, so I guess a lot of there are many things that when I read Esther's first storyboards, I felt like they would echo some of my stories. So in that sense, it was in a much different context, in the French context, but definitely this is also a part of why I didn't want it to only present the poor kids in a seen by rich kids. And I've been doing many workshops with kids in France during children's literature festival, and in particular, I had asked them to do workshop with different classes with children who were a bit slow learners, but also migrant children, so children who would come from Mali, who would come from Pakistan, who themselves have, for example, migrated to France. And I asked this particular workshop with the third book on migration with Nezo and Naji. And there I asked the kids to tell their own story of migration. I asked them to draw what kind of transportation did they take to come to France, the kind of person they met on their journey, what did they leave home. And so in that sense, when you are with them in a very direct way, it is impossible to you have to think of that when doing the book. If you are going to read the book to a poor kid, you don't want a bad reaction. You don't want the kid to tell you, but you're completely wrong about my life. This would be extremely unbearable to live.
So for each of the books, did you do such extensive workshops for yourself, intensive workshops for yourself to sort of understand a child's situation? Did you do this before the book, after the book?
No, the workshops are after the book.
Okay.
A little bit like what we are doing here in India, where the kids have read the books before, they have discussed the books in their class, because one of the use of the books, hopefully, is to be in classroom, is that the teachers can use the books to engage in discussions with the kids. And so I did that after, and the books really act as a place for engaging with the issues. Then they can, if they are not poor themselves, then they can ask more questions. If they are, they can share their own story.
Yeah. So were they like sure.
Can I add something related to this? For whom the books are?
Yeah.
So Cheyenne and I, when we did this project, we wanted the story to stand by themselves. So there was no, in our mind, there was no essay. There was just the books. Our French publisher thought that it would be very important for the French public to have an essay for the parents. Because otherwise the parents would be scared of interpreting or misinterpreting the stories. So we wrote...
Parents would be scared.
Yeah, it would be, because that's not... it's material that's very foreign to them. And, a lot of these kids would not... The parents would not know, would be intimidated, would not want to... they would not pick up poor economics. And so I wrote this one essay for each book for the parents to make them feel comfortable. I didn't think the kids needed them, but the parents needed them. In India, Chiki, our publisher at Juggernaut, thought I needed to write essays for the kids. Because she has in mind rich kids who also need some amount of mediation because they haven't been there. So I was like, fine, I'll write essays for the kids. And Pratham Books was like, just give us the stories. And so finally, the truth of this project
which is unusual,
up,
I thought, because usually in Pratham we do a little essay at the back. So,
no, that's what the Prathams, the books will stand for themselves, which I think relates to the public we are. In a sense, the kids, if you really intend, this is part of the graduated series, 1, 2, 3, 4. This is level 3 for people who are interested in practicing their Hindi or Kannada or Tamil. So this is for early readers who are supposed to read these stories as stories, and who will not be, if it's the kids, there is no reason why they would be intimidated. So it's one of, one of the sort of interesting aspect of this project is how our different friends and publishers thought about it, and therefore decided to play with the story.
Just about the parents in those literature festival, actually, many parents came to me and said that they learned a lot in the books. So
exactly.
So actually, the books are very much for the parents too.
Definitely, definitely. And, it just breaks down things that we already know into simple things that we can understand, and we can never feel the same way about, oh, the poor are poor because they are lazy, because they don't work hard enough, they don't want to leave home, they just want to be victims. You know, all this kind of stereotypes, this breaks all of them, and with a lot of empathy, and lets you know why they are the way they are. But Esther, one of the things I found was, especially in the first two stories about health and about education, some of these problems, they resonated deeply with me also, even though I didn't come from poverty at all. So things like, if you miss one day in school, you don't understand what's going on. There's less and less enthusiasm for the subject, and you never end up catching up, and you end up falling behind. So you need like a really good teacher to notice that you haven't got it, to be accessible. That is one thing. And in the health thing also, where in the health story, what happens is the child doesn't get better at all, Afia. So the parents keep going from doctor to doctor. First they go to allopathic doctor, then witch doctor, then all the rest of it. And Esther says in the essay that, don't you think that's what we all do? I mean, we all did that, especially during COVID. All of us were glugging kadha and kashaya and all these homemade Ayurvedic. Suddenly that became the thing, and we have to, become strong in 10 days. So some of these problems are actually quite universal, even across classes. So I really enjoyed that. And I think we're running out of time, right, Bijal? Yeah. But one last question for Esther, which I think young people in the audience would really love to hear, is that this Nobel Prize winner for economics, the youngest ever and only the second woman, did not know what she wanted to do even after finishing her graduation. So, that's very much like people in Bangalore, like all of us. We all do engineering just to pass time, and then while we are there, we discover what we really want to think about. So how did you come to economics at all?
Yeah, so remember that what I said about having this kind of hope that one day I would justify my luck being in the world. So that was one part of me, but of course the other part of me was playing the role of the dutiful good students in France, and going and taking more exams and taking more exams and taking more exams and going to these fancy schools that the consul mentioned. And I'd always been interested in history, and so kind of pretty naturally at some point when it really became time to choose, I thought, okay, I'll do history. And I had this stroke of inspiration saying, if I want to do something that I've wanted to do since I was a child and never really questioned, I'm likely making a mistake. So let me do something else just in case, diversify my options. And there, it's really very random. At the École Normale, the professor of economics, there was one professor of economics, a wonderfully charismatic man called Daniel Cohen. And he met me in the courtyard and he said, oh, you have to do economics, that's wonderful, you're gonna love it, etc. So he was so persuasive that I started economics with history. And then I hated it. I was like, this was like the false advertisement of the century. It was so simplistic and not interesting and boring. And really, I was ideologically repulsed by it, because I thought this is just a way of putting fancy equation on a very simplistic ideology, which I happen not to agree with. So I wasn't doing anything for me, so I was ready to abandon economics. But at the same time, I was also by that time finishing my undergraduate studies and feeling very uncomfortable about the fact that I was very comfortable. I could live, I was paid to study, I had wonderful professors and students, but my project of doing something useful for the world was not making any progress. So I was in this thing, so okay, economics didn't work out. And then I thought maybe I should go into politics. I was very lost. And so that's when I decided, let me take 1 year off. And I went to Russia.
And the rest is history.
For random reasons. No, first thing is, I met this guy again, Daniel Cohen. In the airport, of all places, waiting for a friend. And he said, oh, you're here, but since you're here, you should go work for me. And I remember he was very enthusiastic and charismatic. So even though I had been the worst student he ever had, he hired me. Then the rest is history.
Or as we say in India, the rest is all written here. Thank you so very much. This was such a lovely interaction, and this is a lovely book, and the hall is open for questions.
Collective gratitude to Professor Cohen. And we are opening the floor for some questions. Because we have limited time, we'll be taking a few. Can we have mics around the room? Yeah. Yeah, we have a hand here.
Check. Can you hear me? Hi, thank you so much. It was a lovely book. I read the dad version. This is the boys version, I guess, kids version. So over the last 20 years, I've worked with a few number of underprivileged communities in a few cities in India. So I've always been confused by their reaction to new opportunity, like when you spoke about RCTs and how it can lead to policy and so on. It's at the end of the day human behavior, and that's very personal and individual, right? Like I've had, if we gave a private school opportunity to someone in poverty, I've seen parents who are very excited about that. Oh my God, I can never sponsor this. Thank you for doing it. And I've had parents say, this will destroy my family's value system in the future. So I don't want my child mingling with the rich because their value systems are different, right? We've had kids who have been really excited about the opportunity. We have had kids who have dropped out second day because they want to go and earn money somewhere else. Even like 10 rupees per day, they're happy earning money at the 6th grade level, but not going to school. So there are such a wide variety of responses from adults and kids. So as an economist, how do you suggest policy? Like how do you see patterns?
So there is no doubt there is heterogeneity in the world. In the same way that when someone comes with a disease, let's say, someone presents themselves with a form of cancer, there are many forms, and they might respond to something, not respond to something. And of course, we still have drugs, which work for a majority of people, or work more for some people, and maybe even have side effects for others, but in which case we know how to deal with them. Very much the same in the social science world. There is heterogeneity in the world, but I think it's not true to think that heterogeneity is so enormous that you cannot make policy. And the truth of the matter is that we see a lot of policy being made and progress being made as a result of this policy. So it's not the case that we can be all things for all people at all time. It's always a matter of statistics and large numbers. So the question of your scholarship program is that whether, the question we would ask in an RCT, for example, is whether on average how many people take up, whether that improves their outcome. And then you can even be more fancy with whether it helps some kids more than others, and we can now be very fancy with machine learning and the like to try and predict who it's going to help. But at the end of the day, we operate in the world very much thinking there is not so wide heterogeneity that it's impossible to predict what's going to happen to people. Otherwise, you couldn't even, cross the street, because if someone suddenly decides that they want to change the way they drive, you might be run over. With some kids.
Some kids, yeah. But you can start.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I wanted to ask, how do you collect data? Like, do you nicely ask the people how their experiences?
Let me take the opportunity to acknowledge the second row here, which is full of the JPAL team. If you don't know them yet, they gain to be known. Yeah, we ask them nicely. But let me add one more thing, is that actually more and more data is available in various forms. So sometimes you have to ask people, you kind of visit people and sit with them on the floor and ask them questions. Sometimes there is data that's actually collected for other reasons that you might use. For example, for education project, you might use the grades or the exam questions that are collected anyways. Sometimes there is even data from satellites that we can use, for example, to look at the impact of a regeneration program. we can just look at, at it from the earth. So there is a whole variety of data, which is very fun to collect and to use.
Yeah. My question is in follow-up to what Rupa asked and the gentleman before me, who this book is for. The one constituent is the privileged kid who don't know the other side, how the other half live. But what impact do you feel this will have if we give it to the poor people? I have some tiny little experience of working with underprivileged people. While I find their condition to be very appalling, they were very much at peace. They see it, at least in India, something like a karmic scorecard handed over to them, and they have total, for lack of better word, loss of agency and willingness to kind of question their place. And they're totally fine with it, living on handouts and all. And then on the other end, the incumbent societal structure says that this ignorance is very much important for social order. So what can be, is it like the purpose of this book is to kind of make them aware, or is it a problem for economists or the social science and activism thing?
I would say the main purpose of this book, especially the language version, is to have nice, beautiful stories that kids want to read. That would be, I think, the first purpose. And that ideally then that for the poor kids, that they feel, but also for richer kids, for all kids, that they feel that there is in these characters a lot that is familiar to them, like the story of education that anybody could relate to, and many things that are different as well, because as he was saying, there is heterogeneity in the world, so not every poor kid is going to find himself or herself in all of the stories that are being told. So regardless where you approach these books from, hopefully people will get into the universe and trying to see how problems get raised and how they get solved. And we tend to also always leave them a little bit open. It's rarely the case that there is a simplistic solution. There is always one part of it that remains unsolved.
About this, it's also that there are 32 pages per book, but among those 32 pages is not one lesson after the other relentlessly. There are also, we paid a lot of attention to, there are some pages where they just eat together and they are happy to share something. There are some pages where they rest. There are some pages where they face like a hardcore economic question, but otherwise it's just not a pleasurable story. And for example, in the first story, it is a story about education and about a kid dropping out and the whole issue of how kids learn and all that. But primarily, it is also about this kid whose mother is angry at, and she runs away and she wants to stay with the kids. And that somehow is a very universal feeling. And we paid a lot of attention to balance all of this, to not make the books just one long lesson.
And I think they've really succeeded with that, so congratulations.
So, adding to that, on data, you mentioned that you have a group of around 600, 700 people. So, how is it expensive? Like you said, incentive-based collection of data, right? On what aspect is it better and more efficient on the basis of labor, time, cost? Or like on what aspect do you say it is cheaper, or just as a cost?
Cheaper than what?
No, you said it makes economic sense.
Make economic sense to immunization. Were you talking about immunization, or were you talking about data collection?
You had mentioned that it was cheaper, right?
Incentive based.
On
so
what aspect?
What aspect? So suppose that you send a nurse to a village to immunize the kids. She needs to travel. She goes on motorcycle. She needs a fridge. She needs to be paid. All of that needs to happen, regardless if you immunize 0 kid or 1 kid or 1,000 kids. So what happens when you give incentive is that a lot of kids, many more kids from the village come, and also many more kids from the other villages. So during one session, instead of immunizing 12 kids, she immunized 100 kids. So per child, that fixed cost is divided by 10. So that's, you save much more money than the money you spend in giving the incentives. That's why it becomes cheaper. Yeah, to boot.
Thank you for this brilliant conversation. And I could relate to a lot of it because I've worked in Rajasthan with the Lok Jumbish, which would go to the villages to get children. I used to go as a storyteller, and we used to try and get them into schools. But many of the children would prefer to work in the homes and rearing cattle, because their parents would say, this is what we need help in. So when I would ask them, they said, but after studying, I don't get a job. But here, by just doing a few things, I can get some money. It could be like, singing. In Rajasthan, they like to sing. So he says, I can get money by just singing. So the block development officers with whom we worked would go house to house. So they combined education and the health program. So I would like to ask you, whether it's in Delhi, Rajasthan, in the rural areas, a lot of parents feel the non-formal education is a little easier than the very formal education. Children have to pass exams and such things. So what is your opinion on this? Thank you.
So once again, I mean, there is heterogeneity in the world, but I don't know when you were roaming around Rajasthan, but I think over even certainly the last 30 years, and then even the last 10 years, there has been a really growing acceptance. Parents have really bought into the agenda of education, and not just in India, but everywhere. So today, the vast majority of children go complete primary school, and the ones who don't live in environment like war-torn countries or places where it's really difficult to run a school. So the parents are very much like the ones that we describe in Nilu, where they see the benefits of education, actually. That's why we try to describe them dreaming that she could become a teacher, or she could. So when we interview parents about why they send their kids to school, there is a very strong view that it's opening these opportunities, whether or not that's true, actually. And still their kids would drop out. But I think that's more related to the second half of your point, which is that the school itself is a hostile environment with these exams, and that's kind of what's happening to Nilu. She, of course, doesn't drop out because her mother grabs her, but she wants to give up because that's too. It's not just that it's too hard, it's that it's too unpleasant and it's too discouraging. And it's not very important that in Nilu's book, it's not the fault of the teacher, as the parents seem to believe for a while. It's the fault of the system that insists on these exams and teaching this very high curriculum, and it can be addressed. It's one of our first series of work with Pratham was to evaluate their teaching at the right level approach, which is to what we depict in the book, with the brother and sister coming to help to teach each child at their own level of learning.
Yeah, what I actually liked was that, just a note, that they were non-judgmental in the book, whether about the government or about teachers or about, I think that was a very nice way to do the book. And you said about government officials, in some interview I read, how you were going to depict them a certain way but didn't.
Yes, so we had an actual problem finding a name for someone, so not obviously the highest in the hierarchy, so some player in the bureaucratic game who would come and actually illustrate the BRAC program for helping the ultra-poor. So there is this person who comes to the poorest woman in the village and asks her what she wants to do. And in the book, you see there is this line of text, and to describe that person, we really didn't know what was the precise term. Was it like a government agent? Was it a field worker? Was it some form of, and just the process of thinking that there were no, first that there were no characters like this who are actually crucial in the whole process in picture books. Because it's much easier to draw a teacher, a fireman, an astronaut, that they fill children's picture books world, but you could hardly find a banker, an insurance worker, someone from those middle job. And but also one of the things we were conscious of throughout the book was to precisely give competing opinions. And for example, this insurance. Oh yes. This insurance worker is also explaining to the kids why maybe he doesn't want to help them repaying the boat, and by giving many different perspectives throughout the book and without trying to tie them up all together in like one single linear narrative. This is also what triggers the kids questioning.
Hi, Esther and Cheyenne. Your book about cooking to stay alive is what I've been through. And I had a question for both of you. How does food habits, nutrition, and how do you look at that in terms of how economics works in the context? Also, I want your views on veganism. So, and both of you. Thank you.
I have no view on veganism, so I'm going to start. It's another of how would I know. On nutrition, I do have a view, which is that it's, for example, in India, one of the major problem of poverty in India today, and one where I regret to say I have many attempts and exactly as many failures to my in my table of success and failures. So there is a really, in India specifically, people don't get enough of the micronutrient that they need. It's not about calories, it's about iron and vitamins and things like that. And this leads to all sorts of health problems. In children, and as they age, we do know that undernutrition in childhood has long-term effect in adulthood as well. So this is, but it's really something on which I have worked on and off for now maybe 15, 20 years and haven't found a way to really change, precisely because I have no view on veganism, but people have a very strong view of what they want to eat. And it's deeply related to a sense of identity. And whenever you try to change that, like even a tiny bit, it's difficult. And I think it's difficult for a very legitimate reason. And so I haven't found a way in yet. One question. Oh, here.
No, but I have the opposite. It's sad that Abhijit is not there because he's the real foodie. But we've been doing this column in Times of India every Sunday, and precisely the whole point of the column is to say that beyond like everyone's personal preferences, we too often forget that eating is social. And actually, in the picture books, you'll see many instances in which they eat together, they share food, and that sometimes having a very specific food habit can prevent that. And I'm actually a vegetarian from birth, so whenever I come to India, it's always that. But I came to eat more fish and meat precisely because sometimes I feel it's a bit offensive to refuse something someone has spent a lot of time carefully cooking and is presenting to you. So to be moderate.
Maybe we can relate that to the first question you asked about universalities, and maybe it is not by chance that there is no book on nutrition per se, because maybe this is a theme that is so deeply cultural that this is not a book, this is not something that we could describe as one problem that has a universal form that you could find in Kenya, in India, in Morocco. And it's not because we don't think nutrition is important, but because it actually has this, is so social and cultural that doesn't fit with the premise of the book. But fortunately, we see many people eating and not eating enough and being fed as social moment as well. So food plays an important role, but there is not a specific book on how to make sure that Afia is not iron deficient.
So in economic textbooks, we read a lot about the conflict between equality and efficiency, which is basically providing for the poor versus developing a country. Do you think it's a distinct problem, and do they both hinder each other? Development versus
So I think the favorite, almost the national sports of development economists is to find cases where those trade-offs are not trade-offs anymore, where you can increase efficiency while increasing equity. So that's almost that, it's like equivalent of winning in chess. So we are looking for a checkmate, exactly. So we are looking for these solutions because there are actually many where inequality is inefficient because, for example, when it prolongs, you have the story of the nudge for the witch. The woman is so poor that she's not able to contribute anything. Then through the programs, she actually becomes richer, and she starts having a business and contributing. And throughout all the other books, she actually is a person that has a lot of wisdom. And you can see, and she's the one through which many solutions appear. So you can see that, that she actually had a lot to contribute, but we were losing it when we left her being that poor, and people were actually ready to cast her out. So that's an exact example of where there is no trade-off, but on the contrary, there is you can increase efficiency while increasing equity.
Thank you so much. I'm sorry we are absolutely out of time. When you get your book signed by Esther, maybe you can pop in your question. Thank you so much. Thank you. Bye. Namaste.